welcome everybody to our September WEAll Talk. We're here today. We are lucky to have Willard as our speaker and providing us with great presentation and with a great talk on his paper, 7 Bold Strokes to Save Our World.
And thank you, Anna, and thank you all for joining us too. The purpose of this part is to give you a little context to what it was that caused me to decide to generate a white paper like this. As some of you may be aware, I've been trying to engage the business community more proactively in sustainability kinds of initiatives, environmental and social activities that are more positive than many of what they currently are undertaking. And I've been doing that for about 20 years. And part of what I've been trying to do is convince companies that it's in their self-interest to do that, to pay more attention to environmental and social things. So the business case for doing that. And, you know, it's been helpful. It's been working to some extent, but I'm very frustrated at the slow pace of the changes that need to happen. And almost as a therapeutic exercise, I decided to put myself in a position where I was in charge of the world and use a magic wand to be able to correct some of the issues that we're faced with. And my big concern is that we're faced with issues that we're not good at dealing with. Specifically, they're global issues. We're okay dealing with local issues, or better, dealing with local issues, but we're faced with concurrent clusters of crises at a global level. And that's kind of unsettling. The environmental ones are the lightning rod for the environmental issues are, of course, climate change. The social issues are the impact on society of the pandemic, COVID-19, which is a global problem. And on the economic side, it's global unemployment, global people that are struggling with unjust inequities, financial as well as other kinds of inequities. And as a human civilization on this planet, we are just not as equipped as we should be with looking at global risks. So one of the questions that's been niggling on my back burner for a while is, like, who's in charge of the world? I mean, if these are global issues, who's in charge of these things? And of course, the United Nations comes to mind, but we understand that it's not equipped, not resourced appropriately to deal with these. But there has been something which some of you have probably seen each year. The World Economic Forum, the WEF, comes out with this thing called a Global Risks Report. And the Global Risks Report looks at about 30 different risks that are on the horizon that can do some damage, if we're not careful, to the economies of the world. And they slice and dice them into the normal 2x2 matrix when you're looking at risks. The impact, if they were to happen, that's the vertical axis, and the likelihood of them happening within the next 10 years. So they color code them into the 5 things that 5 categories that you see there. 3 of the categories are environmental, social, and economic, which are the 3 dimensions of sustainability. So it acknowledges that some of these things are related to the topic of what I'm concerned about. I should also acknowledge that this latest report was put together last fall, before the pandemic hit. So what you see over here on the left-hand side, and I know you can't read it, so I'll just sort of indicate where it is. That's infectious diseases. And at that time, the likelihood of it happening was relatively low, but the impact, if it were to happen, was relatively high. So I expect the next report, which is going to come out in January, we'll have that over into the high quadrant. There are a couple of other things, the fiscal crisis and the unemployment problems. I expect they will migrate up into that quadrant as well. So there's movement here, but there are about 1,000 economists from the public sector, the private sector, from academia that put their heads together and try to anticipate what these things are and how serious they would be if and when they happened. So up in the upper right-hand quadrant, there's this little thing called global governance failure. And that's been there for a number of years. And it's sort of intriguing. I thought, global governance, what is global governance? What does that mean, global governance? Like, it implies that somebody is in charge of the globe. But as you dig down into that, the way in which the WEF talks about it is more on the technological side than on the overall side that we would normally think of. But it got me thinking. And it also reminded me that there are various points of view as to who's in charge. And I remember a book that I read almost 25 years ago when I was still working in IBM Canada by David Corton, which is a brilliant book, When Corporations Rule the World. And up until that point, I didn't think it would be necessarily a bad thing if they ruled the world. But then I thought, geez, after reading that book, I had misgivings about the role of IBM, the role of global corporations, and so on. It just got me thinking. And in fact, it kind of put me over the edge on the need for businesses to be much more careful about what they do and respectful in the way in which they do it. So after some thinking, I thought, okay, so it's not a single body that's in charge of the world. It's a collection of large countries, the G20, and large corporations, multinational global corporations, who either directly or indirectly through other bodies seem to determine what we do and how we do it on this planet as a human civilization. So as I thought about it, it would be kind of nice if we got both of those groups on the same page as to what's important and where we want to get to, the corporations as well as governments. And back in 2015, governments agreed that the roadmap that they should be embracing, at least members of the United Nations, 193 states that are members of the United Nations, agreed that the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, are a pretty good map, a blueprint for the kind of society that we want to get to. And if you take a look at it and you say, well, what's missing? Not much is missing. It covers pretty well all the things that we would hope that governments would pay attention to. And the good news is that there are large corporations that are starting to reframe a lot of their initiatives on the environmental and social side around these as well, and saying, hey, we care about these and we're contributing to them. And in fact, we can organize these into the usual 3 clusters of things that we look at from an ESG perspective. And the environmentally related SDGs, there are 6 of them. Some that have to do with the way in which the company treats its employees, and some the way in which it is contributing to the well-being of the community. So we can rearrange these into the clusters that we normally think of when we think of environmental, social, and governance kinds of things. It's environmental impact, community impacts, employee impacts, or worker impacts. So that's kind of good. It seems like common ground. Corporations care about these things, governments care about these things. So that's why I use them as a framework to encourage with the bold strokes. So with that as background, these are the bold strokes. And you've had a chance, hopefully, to have a peek at the paper. There are 28 actions embedded in these 7 bold strokes, or actions that I think would be appropriate to make these things happen. But the first 2 really have to do with measurement. For whatever reason, I really think that we need to clean up our act on what it is we keep track of, and keep track of things that matter. Keep track of our progress towards the SDGs, keep track on the impacts of companies on their stakeholders. So the first one is all about replacing this terrible metric for how things are going, this GDP metric, with something which is closer to a genuine progress indicator or a genuine happiness. There are different names for it, a well-being indicator, but something which is more inclusive of environmental and social dimensions of the world in which we live. The second one has to do with acknowledging that there's a lot of chatter in the business community about repurposing organizations and a multi-stakeholder purpose. Long overdue. Up until the last 5 years or so, it was the mantra of all the business schools that the purpose of a corporation was to maximize shareholder wealth. And now there's a movement to redefine that the purpose of a corporation is to maximize stakeholder well-being. So let's assume that they're serious about that. So we need to keep track of how that's going and how the metrics that they are keeping track of from a financial side are integrated in the way in which they report. So keep track of natural, human, and social capitals as well. Integrate all of this into the governance and keep track of the company's impact on stakeholders. And I'm also taking the liberty of assuming that the environment and society are special case stakeholders. They definitely can impact the corporation, and the corporation can impact them. So they kind of fit the definition of a stakeholder. So I think if we started to treat them like stakeholders, we would be paying a more appropriate attention to them. The third one is a way to get the attention of a lot of the companies by the buying power of companies, buying power of large corporations and the buying power of large governments. So encourage sustainable procurement, which is really about buying the most sustainable products from the most sustainable suppliers. And this requires suppliers to disclose how they are doing on sustainability, on ESG, and to disclose that. So we need to provide them with tools that help them do that without requiring a PhD in sustainability to do it. So that's a lot of the recent work that I've been working on. The tax system, goodness me, there's so much opportunity. I didn't know where to stop on this, but the tax system is just so screwed up. The way in which corporations can avoid paying taxes is obscene. So we really need to clean that up. Gender equality is a no-brainer. The Green New Deal, there are various incarnations of that. It doesn't matter which one you choose, but they're all destined to do something about climate change in a way in which improves the social dimensions of what we're trying to get to as well. So very, very smart ways of doing that. There are hopeful signs in what was just announced in Canada in the throne speech that they're almost serious about that. So we'll see when the legislation comes in as to whether they follow through on some of their rhetoric. And the banking and securities and the monetary systems of the world really need reform as well. So that's intended to be a starter set of ideas. There's not, I call them bold strokes, but I don't know if they're that bold. I mean, we've known this for a long time. There's not much new in there. It's the packaging of them and the urgency of them that may be the bold part. That's the radical urgency. And I think that they're first steps. They're not necessarily the full suite of things that we need to pay attention to, but it's a pretty good start on at least starting to measure the things that matter and engaging the right people on trying to get us to where we are, where we need to be. As a father, as a grandfather, as a member of society, I am very uneasy that the pace at which we have been undertaking these things in the past is just not cutting it. And we need to get on with it. So that's why I thought, what the heck, I'll as a therapeutic exercise, just get this out of my system and write the paper. And then roll up my sleeves and see if there are some of these things that I can contribute a little bit more personally to. And that's what we'd like to engage you folks in a discussion about. I expect that by the very nature of WEAll, there are lots of groups and individuals that are doing amazing things on these. So we're going to give you a chance to share some of that with us. So I'm not sure where that came from, Anna, but anyway, could you?
Neither. I was wondering what that is. Anyway, Bob, I just wanted to remind you that we have the poll.
Yes.
And apart from using it, now you can explain it, maybe, you know, the question that you throw on the brief description of what this was going to be about, like hearing as well what people were missing apart from, you know, those that you had explained. So I'm just, if you think it's a good time now for me to share would you like to see what they think about them, or you want to do it later?
So now's a good time.
Okay, so I hope everybody can see that on your screen. So basically, I just wrote down those 7 bold strokes, and we would love to hear your opinion.
So you folks have had experience in all of these things, and from your perspective and your experience, which ones do you think are the most important for us? If you had to shortlist this as to which ones are most important or would have the most leverage, just check those off and we'll see what the consensus is.
Okay, I'm gonna give a little bit of extra time.
Something just, that was a strange sound.
Yeah, I muted.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so there is only one person missing, I guess is me. So, because I cannot do it. So, and Paul. And I'm gonna share the results.
Thank you.
So,
wow,
you all see it.
Good spread. Oh, heavy on the tax system.
A fair and consistent global tax system
Yeah.
is one with more votes.
Yeah,
Followed by implement a Green New Deal.
Mm-hmm.
And the first 2 that you were mentioning at the beginning as well, Bob.
Yes. Yes. Way to go. Boy, that's a good spread. Okay, so what we'd like to do is invite you to elaborate a little bit more on why you chose the ones you did, or ones that you're working on that you think have high leverage, so that we can just learn from each other and share some of the good ideas that are underway in the world with each other. So this is the opportunity for us to do a little bit more of the typical WEAll sharing.
Bob, I think for this part, if you could stop sharing the screen, that would it would give us the opportunity to see your faces, and I can keep track of those who raise their hands and they want to contribute, they want to share, they want to mention, they want to ask questions. So now is the time for you to open your mics, and if you want to say, Abdi, you were the first one, you were fast, wow. Michael, you will be the next one.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you from whichever time zones you are. I am in Mumbai, India, so it's almost 9 p.m. Here. I chose the well-being, the sustainability and well-being part as one of the top priorities, or my first bold stroke in Bob's list of radical urgent changes that we need to do, because I feel from an organizational and individual perspective, it is time we get right kind of thinking system in terms of our priorities. And I think all good change starts with us. You know, as Mahatma Gandhi from India, the great Indian guru and reformist, had said that if you want to change the world, the change begins with you. You be the change first. So from that perspective, I think from personal and organizational level, a lot of well-being practices are missing. And I am personally also working on a well-being project, which soon I will talk about in the common meetings in the days ahead. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that perspective. And I totally agree with you. The challenge that we all have is to walk the talk on this stuff. And I totally agree that it starts with us. Others?
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, oh, thank you for that. It was very inspiring. Profound and simple at the same time. Yeah, just for context, I'm in Lancaster in England, in the north of England, northwest of England, and it's about 4:30 in the afternoon. So just so you know, yeah, we've been working with businesses locally as a community. Lancaster's got a population of about 140,000 people, and all the businesses pretty much are small or micro. We're very, very lucky in so far as the bigger businesses and the anchor institutions are pretty much on board with a broad general corporate social responsibility agenda. They all say they want to make that social, environmental, and poverty are big things for them. And we're working on various ways of sort of pulling them together. And this on the corporate social responsibility side of things. I just want to see if you think it's a good idea, which is that if people are electing in with their information and their data on how corporately responsible they are, financially, socially, in whatever way, to really focus on put the onus on contributing data from businesses, so that those businesses who basically don't contribute to that process and they don't reveal what they're doing and they don't make those processes transparent, you know, to have a broad assumption that, well, they're not really doing anything, you know, let's just assume that they're not pulling their weight in terms of creating a viable future. And I'm not quite sure what you think about that approach. So it's not really a naming and shaming, it's a naming and praising all the people that are doing good stuff, and then by a process of admission or omission, it becomes more obvious who's not really taking part, contributing. I don't know what you think about that strategy.
I totally agree with it, but the courage of governments to actually implement something which mandates disclosing or reporting on these things is pretty low these days. Europe is way ahead of North America on that. So the European Union has put out a requirement that any company over 500 employees has to report on a bunch of things that are within the umbrella of environmental, social, and governance or sustainability kinds of things. That's good. In Canada, there's nothing like that. There's a requirement to do a financial report, but there's nothing that says you have to report on your sustainability performance, your so-called non-financials. Same thing in the US, same thing in most parts of the world. So governments are very hesitant to bring in additional, what they would consider to be red tape. And I think they should get past that. I really think that it's high time that we required companies of all stripes to be much more transparent about how they're doing on these things and have a consistent lens on the kinds of things that we would like them to report on. So it's not rocket science. We know exactly what those things are. There are 18 of them, and we can help them with the metrics associated with those and require them to tell us how it's going, especially the extent to which they are reducing the harm that they are doing. So in most cases, really what we want them to do is stop doing harm to the environment and society. And we have metrics that help them keep track of that and see how close they are to not doing any harm, and then hopefully doing some good as well. And we can help them identify what that would look like if they were to do it on the 18 things as well. So I totally agree with you. Investors are our biggest lever on all of this. This is the irony of it. It's not so much governments asking them to do this. Yeah. Investors are the ones who are getting a little twitchy about whether or not they're investing in a risky company, a company that could be blindsided by getting a bad reputation for doing some bad things, or just not being ready for climate change or any of these other crises that are on the horizon, and that could jeopardize their assets. So the investment community, ironically, is the one that seems to be getting the attention of businesses when we are looking for them to be more transparent about how they're doing.
Can I just have a very quick comeback on that, which is because we're not big enough to influence government here, definitely not. But there's also consumer pressure and customer pressure. So what we're trying to do is create that, because the community is small and at a local level. You're more visible, and your actions are more visible, and they're more visible to your customers and other stakeholders. So I think we're really using or going for the peer pressure side of things rather than the legislative. Although I can see how, and I'm very hopeful. I think businesses are leading the charge actually, but I can see why they're asking for governments to legislate, because they want that sort of level playing field when it comes to sort of competition and standards and things. But for our part, we're working on the sort of the local peer-to-peer customer.
So just very quickly, Anna, bull stroke number 3 is about using the customer hat of governments, for example, to require their suppliers. So this is the government, not as a regulator, but as a buyer, as a customer, to ask whoever it is that they are considering as a supplier to please tell them how they're doing on contributing to the SDGs. Because the government, obviously, as a member of the UN, cares about these things. So they're just curious whether or not the supplier does too. How's it going on the SDGs? And that would make them significantly more aware of the importance of these environmental and social aspects, and required to disclose them in order to qualify as a supplier. So it's using the government as a market force as opposed to a regulator to encourage that.
That's really good.
Others?
Yeah, Vicky asked. No.
Go ahead, Anna. You take charge here.
Good morning. A really great presentation, Bob. Thank you so much for it. I have one question which you can answer at the end, which is who is the we that you're talking about that has the indicators? Because I'm not sure who that is. But I know that there is a global reporting initiative, which is an organization which tracks sustainability. I think maybe you're familiar with it, I don't know, but they have been doing work for about a decade trying to make sure that corporations start to incorporate ESG into their reporting so that it becomes a regular part, not just profit and loss statements. But my real question to you is, I know you're a big fan of the procurement side of these things, but cost is still going to be something which in the metrics is going to have to be reworked. Because when you are supplying school breakfasts for children and you tell me, okay, well, I'm going to get organic apples, and organic apples cost, 5 times as much. And in this case, probably more after COVID and the supply chains. And I only have $5 per student to pay for lunch. Then how does procurement help that process, which is both the food security, nutrition for people? It goes to the Green New Deal for sure, but how do I justify it, and where can I get the metric that would help me to make the better decision?
So that gets into procurement through a different window. But when you're taking a look at what it is you're buying, of course, price is going to be a very important aspect of it. But there may be some other attributes of the product or service that you are acquiring, which deserve some weight as well. When you're taking a look at the appraisal criteria that you're using as to whether you're going to buy organic apples, or whether you're going to buy normal apples, or whether you're going to buy apples from California or from China or from next door. So there are different dimensions of the purchase that you would normally, as a buyer, take into consideration. The weight that you give to those has to do with the lens that you bring to the issue. So if a government really cares about some of these other attributes of the product other than the price, then it's appropriate that they weight those things accordingly. And as companies repurpose themselves, and as governments repurpose themselves as well, and are given the wherewithal to be able to make smarter decisions, purchase decisions that in the long run are going to be better for everybody, then I think these factors get appropriately weighted, and it makes it look like it's a better decision, even though it may look initially like it's a little bit more expensive. The long-term benefits of buying those kinds of things start to be taken into consideration. So there's an approach in the procurement world called total cost of ownership, which takes a look at the not only the initial cost of buying it in the first place, but the ongoing expenses and benefits of the product over its life. And that allows those considerations to be appropriately involved in the decision making. So another part of the free and open source tools that I have is a sustainable procurement toolkit that includes how to do that kind of an evaluation.
Thank you.
And the other part, Vicky, you mentioned was the effort by various organizations to bring together all of these different metrics that are out there, the Global Reporting Initiative, the SASB initiative, the Integrated Reporting Initiative, the Future Fit Business Benchmark Initiative. There are lots of different ways of assessing sustainability. And hopefully the efforts that all of these folks are engaged in now to try to harmonize all of those and come up with some consistent metrics is going to happen more quickly than in the past. There are lots of promises, but few deliverables so far. So in the meantime, I've come up with a set of metrics. It's called a 3-in-1 Sustainability Assessment Toolkit, which is intended for small and medium-sized enterprises as well as large ones, but it helps companies self-assess how they're doing on the 18 core ESG things that we want them to pay attention to.
Thank you, Bob. Martin raised his hand. Your turn.
Yeah, hiya. Thanks, Bob. Just to
Martin.
pick up on the procurement thing, because I think that's quite an interesting thing, and then to segue into something else. But in the UK, we've got a piece of legislation called the Social Value Act, which basically allows authorities, say a city council, for example, to factor a wider conception of value than just best value. So thinking about what Vicky was saying in terms of
Very good.
yeah, so that you could say, okay, I'm going to get the cheapest apples from the cheapest place or something, or you could talk about, okay, how am I going to sustain a particular local business that's involved with supplying fresh food across the city, for example. So, I think authorities can be market makers in various ways. And that's kind of what you're saying about the state, Bob, isn't it? Is the state can effectively try to constrain the activities of a variety of actors through establishing rules for marketplace action.
Yes.
And I agree with you up to a point. The problem is, and going back to the Corton example, which is a tremendously prescient book and really interesting that you pulled that one out, is of course that the way that most states behave with respect to corporations is effectively to bend the knee. And to find it incredibly difficult, either politically or legally, or I don't know, perhaps ideologically, to find ways to treat corporations as actors that need some kind of constraint. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question in that sense is a more political one. I really, I like the vision you're putting forward. But your starting point was the kind of global governance question, states and corporations. And whilst we've still got corporations involved in global governance, then it seems to me that we're not really going to get states to do very much.
No, I totally agree. And the cost of elections requires politicians to be more and more beholden to their funders. And many of those funders are corporations. So it's a sort of a downward spiral on all of these things. And you start to wonder who's really in charge. And it starts to look like corporations. So the extent to which corporations are repurposing themselves to pay attention to all stakeholders rather than just shareholders is encouraging, but it's going to take a long time for that to happen. So that's why I think the sustainable procurement approach is sort of the Trojan horse in all of this. It's a sneaky way of getting companies to pay attention to these things because their customer is asking them. And if the government in Canada, the federal government has buying power of about $23 billion a year. Altogether, if you include provinces and municipalities, it's about $43 billion a year that they buy products and services. So if all of these governments simply ask their suppliers, by the way, would you please tell us how you're doing on sustainability, on contributing to the SDGs? If you want to be one of our suppliers, tell us. If you don't, don't. And this has already been done. Walmart did this in 2005. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Walmart in 2005 sent out a 15-question questionnaire to their 100,000 suppliers all over the world. And they said, would you please tell us how much energy you're using and how much water you're using and how much waste you're creating and how you treat your employees, and have you ever visited one of your suppliers? A bunch of normal kinds of things you would worry about from a sustainability perspective. And some of the suppliers said, just a second here. You can ask us about the attributes of the product that you're buying from us, but you're asking us about us as a company. You don't have any right to do that. You're not a government. So no, we'd rather not tell you all of this stuff. And when Procter & Gamble pushed back with that, Walmart said, hey, totally understand. And if you would rather not be one of our suppliers, you don't have to fill this out. And all of a sudden, Procter & Gamble thought this was a heck of an idea. And the next year, they sent out a 12-question questionnaire, which they called a citizenship questionnaire, to their 80,000 suppliers all over the world, asking them how they were doing on very similar kinds of things. So when you get a big purchasing force called a buyer, called a customer, called a government, or a big corporation, asking their small and medium-sized enterprises or their suppliers, how's it going on this stuff? All of a sudden, companies feel a little bit more obliged to answer and pay attention to these things. And then when you start to introduce this as weighted criteria as to how sustainable the company is, then it becomes important that you not only disclose it, but you start to improve on it and are better than your competitors. And right now, in most of the public procurement that happens all over the world, the most that a company gets for being a sustainable enterprise is 5%. And it's a ticky mark. You either get 5 or you get nothing. Are you doing anything on this stuff? Tick mark, yeah. It's ridiculous. So what we need is a more granular version of that and a more heavily weighted version of that. So initially, all we're asking them to do is disclose. 3 years on, we'll start using it as a weighted criteria. So when I was in IBM and I was selling to the Alberta government, I was stationed in Edmonton, Alberta, selling to they were my customer, the government of Alberta. We had to give them the IBM in Alberta story to earn the right to be a supplier to them, a provider of computer equipment to them. And they wanted to know how many jobs we were creating and the taxes we were paying and all of that kind of stuff in Alberta. They wanted to know the extent to which we were helping them. And that counted in the way in which they treated us. So what we're suggesting is that governments come at this through that kind of lens. Does the supplier care about the same things you do? And we also had to provide them with a total cost of ownership for all of our equipment as well. We provided them with that to help them understand that although they pay more for us initially, over the long term, this was going to be a better deal for them.
Could I just have a quick comeback, Anna? Is that all right? On that one, which is to say that, yeah, and I think you can extend that too in terms of a preference for particular kinds of organization. You know, the corporation is not the only organizational form, and indeed it's an organizational form that's demonstrated its fondness for generating revenues, but its indifference to its externalities. So you can easily imagine forms of social value procurement which provide positive scores for things like a cooperative or a mutual of some description, or community interest company or something, to encourage a more diverse population of businesses that can effectively be competing for contracts from states or cities or possibly even large organizations. Because otherwise we run the danger of kind of assuming that the only kind of business that matters is the corporation. And I think that could be a bit dangerous for us.
So there are lots of efforts to, especially in Canada, favor women-owned businesses, favor Indigenous-owned businesses, or businesses which employ a large number of Indigenous people. So there are different ways that governments can tilt the scale a bit for organizations that are really trying to address some of the issues that the government is as well. Hannah?
So I just want to mention that there has been a few comments. First of all, I don't want to forget it. So Vicky is asking if they can get the toolkit that you were talking about before in the previous mentions. So, and then she commented on one of the actions that the Church of England is doing as an investor, that has created a climate conscious invested index required for money managers to invest their pension funds. So that is something that Vicky shared on the chat, and that you have had the opportunity to read. And then Michael, maybe you want to say this, but then there's something that I read here from Peter. Peter, I don't know if you want to say it yourself, like you know, you can open your mic, but I think it's an important thing to reflect. He said, well, I think Peter, do you want to say it? Yeah, I don't need to do it.
Oh, I always enjoy listening to you present these views. They're much more articulate. No, I guess I'm always interested in the temptation to repeat and reinvent, reshape these proposals for change, when in fact you could say for the past 40 years we have known all this. In fact, you made the point during your presentation, Bob, and it seems to me that unless we're very honest about why there is resistance to change, and there's rationality, and you know, there are rational arguments against change within the system, unless we're honest about acknowledging that is the case, then our interventions will continue to be ineffective. And I suppose implicit in what I'm saying is that unless we name the system, the dominant economic system, and the logic of that system, and name the fact that this is a question of power and interest, the minority interest that continues to see the system as serving its interest, we are not going to go very far.
I agree. And a lot of the agents of that system, such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, the OECD, they're the ones who are making the rules, and they can supersede any sovereign rules that are made by countries. So can we reform them to align with the kinds of things we're talking about? Or do we need new organizations? And there is an effort by WEAll, and Anna, you're very close to this as well, to take some of the ideas in this paper and a bunch of other really good ideas and develop a policy paper as to what things could and should be implemented either by those bodies or new bodies, both in a short term and the long term. So there's some excellent work being done by some very, very smart people in WEAll to take some of these ideas and a bunch of others and package them in a way that they are going to be proposed to organizations that are rightly or wrongly in charge. So we normally call them the Bretton Woods organizations because that's the origin of most of them. So we're calling it Bretton Woods 2.0. which is we need to step back and say, okay, how are we going to go forward in the 21st century in a way that's going to benefit all of us? I don't know if that'll work. I don't know. It's not either or. We can establish a parallel economy. A lot of the B Corp movement is that kind of thing, and I'm very, very active in the B Corp movement. Or we can try to reform it from within, and I'm playing both of them. I don't know which one will win, but we need to have every effort. There's not one way or another way. We just need to keep at it. What do you think, Peter?
No, I agree. And I tend to work within and beyond the system. I think we have to work in parallel and create landing spaces for change, as well as expect the system to change.
Yes.
I suppose my priority in your list was to look at the global financial and banking system. I think it's as you say, it's the rule makers, the people who set and pursue the dominant logic of the financial system in particular, who create the incentives for those operating within the system. And it's I think we'll be waiting for a long time for individual actors to go up against those rules, whether they're in the multilateral financial sector or the banking sector. So I think we're all on the same page. But I do think we are very shy about naming capitalism and describing its logic, and being very forthright about the need to either repurpose or simply deconstruct capitalism as a system.
Yeah, originally capitalism, ironically, was for the social good. That's what corporations were set up for. We've kind of drifted a little away from that. But that's where the capitals language comes in. Natural, human, and social capital sounds like it's capitalism. We're talking about capital. So we can slip that in and encourage these non-financial, so to speak, or extra financial capitals to be legitimized as things that companies can pay attention to, keep track of in their management information systems, and make better decisions as a result of those considerations.
So, Maria, I don't know. I mean, we still have a few minutes. I don't know if you have the time. I'm reading your comment, but I would love you to join. To open your mic, and probably you're going to be able to express it much better. You're talking about to watch the following is, I guess, is a documentary. Okay, now I can see it. Please, develop.
I can use 1 minute, I think.
Thank you. Wonderful.
So, I totally resonate with Peter's comment. I don't think we're seriously looking at each of us inside and trying to understand, why do we do what we do in the way we do it? Because if we all have the good intentions and we already know what the path is, what's getting in the way? And so that's one part. The other one has to do with the economic system we have today was created one day. So this documentary talks about it and how it was created. So we need to reflect on that as well. It gives us the opportunity to create another one because it's been done, so no problem. And also to do it in a way that serves the whole and involves the whole. And hence my comment about gender equality. So if we could care for each one as we do for ourselves and for the whole as we do for ourselves, we probably wouldn't be in the mess we are. So there is something, the moment we can treat one part completely different or another part of the planet, there is something in our make. So, I guess that's the challenge for me. So thank you, because this is really, it's useful to actually go through these strokes. I'm planning to use it with the economics students. So I say, okay, how do you do this? Okay, take one stroke and work on it. So thank you, Bob, for publishing that.
And that's the irony of I started off by saying these are global issues, but maybe the solutions are more grassroots kinds of solutions. So the Transition Towns movement, for example, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, Bali and so on, local currencies, a whole bunch of very, very creative ideas that communities decide to implement to be able to develop an economy that works for them and is owned by them and is structured in a way that meets their values and so on. The challenge is to be able to have those ideas disseminate. So you're right that it starts with us. The challenge is, how do we as change agents take those ideas and disseminate them, make them available and attractive and implementable by others who are not yet where we are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the challenge every change agent on the planet has ever had, which is how to take a good idea and promulgate that into the minds, between the ears of the people who are in a position to be able to actually leverage it.
So, Vicky, I think you wanted to say something, and I can see that there are a few comments that, but Vicky, go ahead. Sorry.
No, well, I'm certainly willing to let other people speak. I just wanted to say to Maria and Bob as well, and Peter, that, we are all here today because we are taking those steps. And we can't forget that it is because we are taking those steps that even a notion of well-being is being talked about by WeGo and other people. But the system that you talk about, 500 years of exploitation and extraction, and the architecture that was designed specifically to extract and exploit is deeply entrenched in all of us, and especially at a time like COVID. Are you going to call Amazon? Are you going to go outside and risk your health in order to go and support the small local vendor down the street and your family's health and the old people who live by you? So these are not easy questions to answer, because the system, a part of the system, does indeed serve its purpose, but at too high of an exploitative cost. And that's what we would like to bring down. And I think there are a lot of people in those corporations. I heard yesterday there are 3,000 billionaires in the world. We should identify them and get them to give us $1 billion each.
That's a good start.
Thank you. Bob, I don't know if you would like to say something.
No, I think that was beautifully expressed, Vicky. I totally agree.
So it's true that this would bring us into another hour conversation. I know that there are many different comments from Matthew, why he chose priority replaces GDP, and Noah is talking about local initiatives are amazing, but even local economies depend on global goods. So there are many different comments in here that I know that I'm going to record all of them. I'm going to save them all. I'm going to share them with Bob just in case there is something that we haven't responded today. But as you know, I always try to be fair with the hour that we keep for the WEAll Talks. And but I'll make sure that everything that has been written in here is going to be shared with Bob, and he will respond, and it will be shared on the WEAll Citizens platform, where we can continue with the conversation. There is the discussion forum. Please join the platform if you haven't. But if you are in there, just let's continue, because we need to keep talking about this. We need to keep sharing ideas, and we need to keep moving forward. I'm not going to say anything better than Vicky did, but it's just, it was a really nice wrap up. But I want the last minute, Bob, I would love to hear what you want to say goodbye, before I say the last sentences of this WEAll Talk.
I love these conversations. We're all wrestling with the same things, and we're all coming at it through slightly different approaches, and we need all of them. The thing that appeals to me about WEAll is how it's a lens into how much is going on all around the world. Mm-hmm. None of us can do it by ourselves. And when you start to take a look at the energy that people are bringing to these initiatives all over the world, it's really, really exciting. I think it's doable. you know, if we get our act together and, you know, amplify each other's efforts, I think we can pull this off. And as Vicky says, you know, we've tried this for a long time and it hasn't worked very well. But I think we're at a particular point in time where we've got an excuse to do perhaps a little bit more radical action than previously. So we need to figure out how to do that.
And we will continue doing WEAll Talks, and we will continue gathering, and we all will continue working on this, thanks to all of you. And so I want to say first thanks to Bob for bringing this conversation into our WEAll Talks this month. I want to say thank you to all of you for being here, for participating, for your comments, for your ideas, and for your questions. Thank you all for joining us today. As always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Bob.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.